Have you ever sat in a room full of people, well-dressed, smiling, laughing, and suddenly realized you were the joke? I have. That day was my daughter Emily's wedding. A grand ceremony was held at a luxury resort in Napa Valley, with crystal chandeliers catching the sunset, like the universe was blessing the couple. I sat at the head table, wearing the wine-colored dress Emily had picked out 2 months earlier. "Don't choose anything too flashy, Mom," she'd said. I'd nodded. It was her day. I didn't want to stand out, but I became the center of attention anyway. Just not in a pleasant way. After the ceremony dinner and the applause for the groom's touching speech, Emily stood up with a microphone. "Thank you, everyone, for being here to celebrate this special day with us," she began, voice light and bright. "Before we open the dance floor, I just want to say a few words about my mom." I smiled, surprised but touched. Maybe this was when she'd thank me for raising her or helping pay for most of this wedding. Then Emily said, "My mom is going through something like, how should I put it, Winnie, post-60 life reorientation." The room laughed. I laughed a little, thinking it was a harmless joke. "Honestly," Emily continued, "Mom keeps talking about building a business empire, an empire everyone. We told her to try gardening or painting, but no, she wants to do strategic deals." I think it's her way of feeling young again. The laughter grew louder. Some people nodded knowingly, the way people do when they think they understand. I sat there, keeping my smile fixed. But inside, I was sinking. The chandeliers glittered. My champagne glass trembled slightly. A waiter passed by, setting down another plate of cake. No one looked at me. They were too busy laughing. And I was too busy enduring. But 30 seconds later, that entire room would fall silent, and I doubt anyone could keep laughing after that. Before I tell you what silenced that room, I invite you to be part of the Silent Elderly Stories community, where we believe dreams don't expire. Leave a comment to tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you connect with my journey. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd rebuild my life at 60, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I didn't believe in anything at that point. My name is Linda Morgan. I spent 35 years as an operations manager at a medical equipment manufacturing company. I knew every process, every cost sheet, every person in that place. I thought I'd retire in that office overlooking the parking lot and the little shrubs I'd planted back when Emily was still in grade school. Then came the restructuring. And at 60, restructuring means, "Thank you for your service. Now please leave." They replaced me with a 34-year-old manager who made beautiful PowerPoints, but had never seen a production line up close. Soon after, I finalized my divorce. My husband, now ex-husband, moved in with a woman 16 years younger than me, his former yoga instructor. I didn't blame her. I didn't even blame him. I just felt hollow. Emily was already engaged to Nathan, a finance guy who said every conversation was a TED Talk. I moved into a small apartment outside San Jose, telling myself I'd rest for a while. But rest turned into drifting. I spent days watching home renovation shows, wondering, what am I still good for? Then one night, while typing out a part-time grocery job application, I stopped. I thought I managed entire systems for decades, optimized budgets, rebuilt operations, and now I don't even know what I'm capable of. And then came a strange thought. If those skills helped that company grow all those years, why couldn't they still be valuable, if used differently? I opened a blank Word file and typed 3 letters, LM Strategies. Those 3 letters became the name of my new company, a consulting and operational investment firm. I didn't dream of becoming a millionaire. I just wanted to see what would happen if I didn't give up. I started small, helping a struggling software firm streamline its workflow, advising an electronics manufacturer drowning in production costs. I helped them restructure, cut waste, and renegotiate supplier contracts. Within 6 months, they'd saved hundreds of thousands of dollars and asked me to stay on as a long-term advisor. And just like that, I was no longer the unemployed grandma Emily liked to joke about. I didn't tell my family, didn't post about it on Facebook, partly because I wanted to prove I could do it without bragging, partly because I knew if I told them, they wouldn't believe me. Yikes, Emily once said, "Mom, I know you're great with spreadsheets, but starting a business at 60 sounds like a daytime soap plot." Nathan added, "As long as it makes you happy, but are you planning to make real money or just keep yourself busy?" My sister just smirked. "Instead of a startup, why not learn to bake?" I stayed silent. I was used to that. I didn't need their support, only time. With each client, each signed contract, I grew more certain. I still had plenty to give, and no one had the right to tell me otherwise. In less than 18 months, LM Strategies was no longer a late-life idea, as my sister had called it. It became a streamlined machine where I, a 60-year-old woman with decades of hard-won experience, was running deals the people who once dismissed me could never imagine. I'd acquired 7 tech and manufacturing companies, from healthcare software to medical supply chains, from factory data systems to B2B e-commerce platforms. None of it was beyond my reach, only beyond the limits of their prejudice. And through it all, I kept everything quiet. No press releases, no celebrations, no posts. Just a few photos of meals I cooked on weekends. I still lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment I'd rented after my divorce. I still drove my 7-year-old Honda CR-V. No one would ever guess I managed an investment portfolio worth over $100 million. And I liked it that way. But the price of silence is being misunderstood, being underestimated, being reduced to a version of yourself that others think you should be. Emily often brushed me off whenever I tried to share anything about my work. "Mom, please don't bring up business stuff around my friends," she'd warn before a social gathering. "Especially Nathan's colleagues. They're all in finance. You don't need to try to impress them." I smiled. "I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm just being me." "Exactly," she replied. "You're my mom. Don't try to be someone else." Nathan was worse. He offered to help me design PowerPoint slides for those little consulting sessions. When I mentioned that I was negotiating to acquire a supply chain solutions company, he asked, "How much are they selling for? A few $100,000?" I took a sip of my tea and didn't answer. In reality, that deal was worth $19 million. I even used part of the profit from that acquisition to cover half the wedding expenses: flowers, gown, venue, guest accommodations. But Emily never asked. She assumed it came from the divorce settlement. Mom must have gotten a good share. I didn't correct her. I just nodded. I didn't need them to know. I needed them to see. Then the wedding day drew near. A week before the ceremony, Emily came over to discuss seating arrangements. "There's something I'd like to ask, Mom," she said. I looked up from my notebook and smiled. "What is it, sweetheart?" "At the reception, could you not talk about work with Nathan's side of the family? Especially Mr. Caldwell, he's Nathan's boss." I nodded, though something inside me tightened. "You mean, it's just that sometimes you sound a bit grand. I don't want people to think you're trying too hard." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "All right, I won't bring up work." Emily exhaled, relieved. "I knew you'd understand." "Thanks, Mom." I smiled, but this time the smile carried no light. The wedding was precisely as Emily had dreamed. Flawless down to the smallest detail. Fresh flowers were everywhere, and soft golden lighting and music floated gently through the air. Everyone was smiling, congratulating, and toasting. And I did too. Smiling, toasting, stepping back. As Emily once said, my role was to set the background. I accepted that, because I loved her. The evening program began with the maid of honor's speech, Emily's college best friend. She started sweetly, reminiscing about their school days, the pranks, and Emily's love story with Nathan. I was smiling until her tone shifted. And now, a little about the bride's family. Emily's mom is quite the character. All eyes turned to me. I straightened my back and kept smiling. Mrs. Linda's got herself a new hobby lately. She's in this, what should I call it, self-reinvention phase. A few chuckles rippled through the room. I took a sip of water, trying to stay composed. Instead of gardening or taking up piano like other moms, Mrs. Linda decided to build a business empire. Sounds fancy, right? She even made air quotes when she said empire. Laughter broke out. Some of Nathan's colleagues nodded and laughed so hard they nearly spilled their drinks. She talks about strategies, restructuring, contracts. It's adorable. You don't often meet a retired mom that versatile. The laughter grew louder, crashing against my chest like waves. Emily laughed too. Not nervously, genuinely. She even nodded along, entirely at ease. I looked at my daughter, laughing as her mother was turned into a punchline in front of friends, coworkers, and families. Still, I stayed. The smile on my face had become a survival mechanism, a mask. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to lose my dignity on her wedding day. When the maid of honor ended, she may be a little delusional, but we love her so much. I just wanted to disappear. I counted to 3, then to 10. Then to 50. And then came Emily's speech. I thought, at least she'll set things right. Say something kind. Emily stood, radiant under the soft lights, holding the microphone. And then, as if nothing wrong had been said earlier, she continued. Thank you, Amy, for that amazing speech. My mom really has had quite a journey these past 2 years. She started this something. She says it's an investment consulting firm. But honestly, we just think it's her way of keeping busy. She needed a goal after the divorce, and LM Strategies sounds way cooler than a seniors yoga club, right? The room erupted in laughter. I sat there, feeling something tighten around my chest. Not from humiliation, but from the fact that the loudest laughter came from my own daughter. And then came the line I'll never forget. Mom's always talking about clients, deals, strategic mergers, and all that. Nathan and I just look at each other like, is she serious? Applause, whistles. I looked around at the people who once called me an inspiration in corporate memos, now laughing, thinking I was just some delusional old lady playing entrepreneur. And my daughter was leading the laughter, openly, without guilt. When Emily ended her speech with, well, at least Mom will have something fun to talk about at the seniors club, right, Mom? I knew something inside me had shattered completely. After her speech, I realized I'd had enough. I planned to slip out quietly after the cake cutting, pretending I had a headache or was tired from the weather. Not because I was fragile, but because I didn't want to ruin my daughter's wedding day, even though she had just torn my heart open in front of 200 people. I stepped out into the lobby to get some air. Music drifted from the ballroom. Laughter, clinking glasses, the shuffle of dancing feet. I stood alone, under the soft amber lights, looking down at my heels, their tips slightly sinking into the grass. Mrs. Morgan? I looked up. A tall man in his early 50s stood before me with a courteous smile. Perfectly tailored suit, expensive wristwatch. Everything about him said he wasn't from my side of the guest list. Yes, I replied softly. I'm Robert Caldwell. I work at Orion Systems, you probably know. I'm Nathan's boss. So this was the very Mr. Caldwell Emily had warned me not to try to impress. Of course, I said, shaking his hand. Please call me Linda. Linda, he nodded. I just heard a bit about your work from the speeches. Quite interesting. I smiled politely. Oh, just a few small projects to keep my mind sharp. Actually, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I heard you mention LM Strategies? I nodded. Yes, that's the company I founded. His brow furrowed as though connecting pieces of a puzzle. This might sound a little nosy, he said, but were you involved in the Centrix Labs acquisition 3 months ago? I paused. No evasion, no softening. I was the one behind that deal, I said. His eyes widened. Centrix is a technology partner of Orion, he murmured, and LM Strategies was the investment group that bought Centrix through a satellite fund. He looked at me for a long moment. Wait, he said slowly. Linda Morgan? LM Strategies? You're L. Morgan? I nodded, this time without hesitation. That's when I saw the shock on his face. Not the, oh really, kind of surprise, but the, my God, what have I just done? Kind. He took half a step back as though realizing he'd just dismissed the CEO of one of the fastest growing private investment firms of the year as someone keeping her mind active. Good Lord, he muttered. I had no idea. If I'd known you were... It's all right, Mr. Caldwell, I interrupted gently. No one knows. I prefer it that way. But all those people in there, he glanced toward the ballroom. They're laughing at the owner of their own company. I said nothing, just lifted a shoulder. And you're the investor behind Centrix, Nexitech, DataTrack. We work with all three. He looked at me like he was about to lose his balance. Then suddenly, his expression sharpened. Linda, with all due respect, he said, I think people deserve to know this. They should know who they've been laughing at. I shook my head. Today is my daughter's wedding. I don't want to turn it into a public morality play. This goes beyond emotion, he said quietly. This is about perception, credibility, scale, and truth. I looked into his eyes, and someone truly saw me for the first time that night. Linda, Mr. Caldwell said, I can't stay silent. I placed my hand on his arm. Robert, I know you mean well, but today isn't about me. Exactly, he replied. It's about family, about what people choose to show, and what they choose to hide. But in your case, humility has been mistaken for weakness. Your silence is being read as irrelevance. I stayed quiet. The music had softened inside. A slow ballad for the first dance. Emily and Nathan were stepping onto the floor. Mr. Caldwell looked toward the ballroom, then back at me. Are you sure you want to let everyone go on believing that lie? I didn't answer. But maybe my eyes did. A few minutes later, he walked onto the stage, just as the couple finished their dance, with applause still echoing around the room. He took the microphone and waited politely for attention. When the room fell quiet, he began, Forgive me for interrupting the celebration, but there's something I feel needs to be clarified. Not for drama or gossip, but for fairness. Emily frowned. Nathan turned toward me. I stood near the door, neither hiding nor stepping forward. My name is Robert Caldwell, COO of Orion Systems, and I'd like to say a few words about someone we've all heard mentioned tonight, Mrs. Linda Morgan. A ripple of whispers. Emily glanced around, confused. Tonight, we laughed because we thought Mrs. Morgan was just a mom trying to redefine herself, a sweet woman chasing late-life illusions. Caldwell paused. The room fell completely still. What very few people here know, he continued, is that Mrs. Linda Morgan isn't dabbling in business. She is the founder and CEO of LM Strategies, a private investment firm that has executed 7 mergers and acquisitions in the past 18 months, with a portfolio exceeding $100 million. The murmurs turned into gasps. 3 of the companies owned by LM Strategies, Caldwell went on, are current partners or key suppliers of Orion Systems. Some people in this room, including myself, are indirectly working for the very firm she runs. Emily's face drained of color. Nathan stood frozen. And I say this, Caldwell said, not to flatter, but to point out that sometimes our indifference and arrogance blind us to true capability. And sometimes it's family who are the last to recognize the worth of one of their own. He turned toward me. Linda, I'm sorry I didn't know, but I believe everyone here deserves to know the truth. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I stepped forward slowly and took the microphone from Mr. Caldwell's hand. I didn't need a speech. I only needed the truth. Thank you, Robert, I began. And thank you everyone for listening, even if it might be uncomfortable. I looked around, meeting each gaze until my eyes found Emily's. Today is Emily's day, and I promised I wouldn't talk about work. But maybe it's because I didn't talk that everyone misunderstood. I turned back to the crowd. I didn't start LM strategies to impress anyone. I did it because I knew I still had something to give. I don't need praise, but no one has the right to turn me into a joke. I paused. The room was silent. Emily, I said softly, looking at my daughter, you're not ashamed of who I am. You're ashamed that I'm not who you thought I should be. But I don't owe anyone the version of me they expect, not even you. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I smiled and handed the microphone back to Mr. Caldwell. Now, let's keep dancing. This shouldn't overshadow love. After I returned the microphone, the entire room felt different. The loud laughter that had filled the air minutes earlier turned into a heavy, awkward silence. No one dared look directly at me, or rather, they did, but with a completely new expression. I returned to my seat, and one by one, the people who had laughed at my cute little retirement hobby passed by. They smiled awkwardly, mumbled apologies, and some patted my shoulder, as if a clumsy gesture could undo their thoughtlessness. One man, who had compared me to his mother-in-law selling bracelets on Etsy, muttered, I honestly didn't know. If I'd known, I gave him a polite smile. It's all right. But the truth was, it wasn't all right. Because the only apology I truly wanted to hear came from the one person who remained still and silent. Emily. She wasn't laughing anymore. Her eyes were red, her hands gripping a glass of wine like she needed to hold on to something solid. Nathan stood beside her, pale and stiff. I caught his eyes a few times. No trace of that condescending look anymore. Now it was hesitation, maybe even fear. As the night drew to a close, Emily finally walked toward me. Her eyes glistened. Mom, she whispered. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know. I didn't know. I thought you were just trying to keep busy. I didn't think you'd actually done all that. I looked at her, my daughter, once my most incredible pride, the person for whom I had sacrificed so much just to see her smile today. But that smile had come at the cost of my dignity. You're not wrong for not knowing, I said slowly. You're wrong for not wanting to know. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer right away. I wanted my heart to stay clear, to ensure compassion didn't become submission. Forgiveness is possible, I said, but things can't go back to how they were, not yet. We'll need time and effort from both of us. She nodded. For the first time in her life, Emily wasn't the protected child. She was a daughter learning how to be one again. 6 months later, things were different. Emily and Nathan returned from their honeymoon, hoping the past had quietly faded, but I refused to let it slip away like a dream. I kept my distance. I drew boundaries. We started family therapy, my suggestion. I clarified, if we're going to rebuild this relationship, it has to be from the ground up, not patched over. Nathan changed, noticeably. He addressed me as Ms. Morgan during sessions. When I spoke, he listened. Once, he even asked for my input on a financial restructuring plan and took notes. My sister, who once told me I should learn to bake, now introduced me to her friends as my sister who runs a tech investment firm. Though she still didn't fully understand what I did. I didn't do any of this for validation. I did it to remind myself, kindness doesn't mean silence, and family doesn't mean entitlement. That afternoon, 6 months after the wedding, I stood alone on the rooftop of the new LM Strategies headquarters. A light breeze played through my silver hair, which I hadn't bothered to dye again. Ahead, the city skyline stretched across the horizon, buildings gleaming in the late sun like unnamed opportunities waiting to be seized. I just finished a strategic meeting with 2 subsidiaries, preparing to sign the largest merger deal of my career. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just a PDF file. And a 62-year-old woman once dismissed as a retiree who couldn't sit still. I closed my eyes momentarily, taking a slow, deep breath. This wasn't a victory. It was a declaration. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, told your time has passed, dismissed because you're no longer considered promising, then hear me clearly. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to remember who you were and still can be. They call this stage of life a midlife crisis. I call it a second chance. Only this time, I write the rules. My own daughter once turned me into a punchline at her wedding, but I didn't destroy the night. I didn't scream. I didn't walk out in anger. I stayed. I stood up. I told the truth, not to retaliate, but to affirm, I exist. I have a voice. I have worth. And from that day on, everything changed. Not because I became more successful, but because I stopped letting anyone else define who I was supposed to be. My family? We're still on our healing journey. Emily and I have learned to listen to each other, really listen. We're not exactly back to how we once were, but something better is taking shape. Mutual respect. Nathan? He now texts me with, "Hi, Ms. Linda," whenever he wants my opinion on an investment strategy. I suppose that's his way of apologizing, without actually saying the words. And my sister? She sends me links to finance courses her friends are taking, because, as she says, everyone wants to learn from you. And the best part? The 3 people who laughed at me at that wedding are now clients of LM Strategies. They didn't come to me out of pity. They came because they needed me. It turns out that the public reveal wasn't just an emotional turning point. It was also the best free demo I ever gave. Now, when someone asks me, "You restarted your career at 60?" I smile. No, I didn't start over. I simply stopped pretending it was over.